it seems risky to sales managers to have operating on these thinner pipelines. But when you learn how to sell and win a higher fraction of opportunities, that's a sustainable strategy. Assuming that there's always going to be sort of infinite pipeline that you can tap into, as we're finding today for many companies, that's not a sustainable strategy.
The only thing worse than losing a big deal or missing quota is not knowing why. Here at Closed, we've conducted tens of thousands of buyer interviews for hundreds of B2B companies, and we've uncovered what drives your prospects to buy, not buy, or even churn. In each episode of the Win-Loss Show, we'll show you how you can leverage feedback directly from your buyers to help you increase your win rate, perfect your sales experience, nail your marketing messaging, build the right products, and hit your quota with confidence. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Nate, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. And I'm really excited. You are launching, or just launched, maybe by the time this gets published, a brand new podcast. And I wanted to talk to you about, one, why you're launching this show, but more specifically, why you're launching the show on this one specific topic, because it doesn't seem, I think at first glance, to be a topic that maybe warrants the dedication of an entire podcast to it. So why don't you cue up for our audience what your show is and what it's about?
Yeah, well, the name of the show is the Win Rate Podcast. And we do have a subtitle, which is the science and art of great selling. But the focus is really sales effectiveness and improving win rates. And the motivation for starting it really came from, well, it's nothing recent. This is work that I've done throughout my entire career as a consultant, as a sales leader myself. As win rate was always that was my North Star. As a seller, as a sales leader, that was the metric that I paid attention to, that I believe enabled me to have pretty good success as a individual seller as well as a sales leader in growing startups. And it's occurred to me over the years as I've talked with companies and sales leaders and CEOs, like, wow, people just really aren't paying attention to this and metric at all. And we see the results in companies certainly in the software space, but it's not purely a software space, and in many spaces are still growing to some degree, but doing it with really low win rates. And I'm always sort of baffled by that but when I say low, I think the basic standard as an individual contributor, you should say, look, I should be able to win more than I lose. That should be what I set out to be as my own personal standards. If I'm going to invest my time and energy into working on specific opportunities, I should be working on the ones that I think I have a good chance of winning. And I should be able to win more often than I lose.
It's a great mindset to have. Why do you think so many sales leaders focus so much on, it seems like the focus is pipeline?
Yeah. Well, yeah, where it's like chicken and egg, right? We have that.
I mean,
conundrum.
I know pipeline's important. Like that's, I don't mean it to come across as like, well, why are we generating pipeline? Of course we know that, but like, why do we get solely focused on that number, or so hyper fixated on it?
Well, because I think it is sort of this chicken and egg conundrum. It's like, well, what started first? This overemphasis on pipeline or low win rates? Because if you're a sales leader and you say, look, as a seller, and this is very common, right? We're expecting our AEs to have 5x coverage of their monthly number in their pipeline. And it's like, well, if that's the case, you're sort of saying your win rate in most of those cases is going to be the reciprocal of your pipeline coverage ratio. So if you're asking people to have a 5x pipeline coverage, you're going to have a 20% win rate. And you can look at all the factors sort of play into that. But we sort of got stuck in this loop, is that, hey, my sellers aren't winning at a very high rate, so we need to have more pipeline, more at-bats for them coming through the pipe. But if you say, well, no, let's win, let's focus instead on winning a higher fraction of these, then you're going to need less pipeline. And people say, oh, yeah, I sort of get that. But how do I make that change, right? How do I make that transition?
That's the big
question.
question.
And that becomes the hard part for people is how do I do that? And it's not easy, it's not quick, but you sort of have this choice, as a company, as you want to continue to spend more dollars than you really need to generate more pipeline than you really need, when you could instead focus on being more targeted in terms of the types of deals you're working on. And this is, again, this is sort of this self-fulfilling prophecy we have, or a vicious cycle, if you will, which is if marketing needs feedback from sales in terms of the opportunities they're more likely to close so they can become better and more proficient at targeting the right opportunities. Well, if your sellers are operating in a low win rate environment, they don't really have that intelligence to provide back to marketing to say, yeah,
Mm,
these are the deals that are going to close at a higher rate, because they don't have that track record. And so we sort of perpetuate this idea. So this motion that we're going, it's just, yeah, let's just throw a lot of stuff in the top of the funnel. And, if we're just okay, we'll win 20% of them. And that's sort of been the operating mode in the low interest rate, go environment of the economy in the last 15 years.
right.
But that's changed.
Totally.
And companies now know, look, I'm going to get fewer at bats and I need to win a higher fraction of those. And they don't know how.
So take me back to the early days of Andy Paul's career,
Yes.
where this was your primary metric. This was the metric that you focused on a lot.
Yes.
When you looked at win rate, what would go through your head about what do I need to do to take action to maybe move the needle on this number?
It, r- it's a good question. And it really started with qualification. And so maybe I was really fortunate early in my career to have bosses, sales managers I worked for who were put a lot of emphasis on this. But the emphasis was, look, if you have a choice to make as a seller, and this is may even take a step back from that, is when I started in sales, which is ages ago, but the the mindset that we were given was, look, you've got this territory, and whether it was a vertical market line of business territory or geographic territory, but they said, look, you own this. This is your company. You're the CEO of this territory.
Mm.
So what are you going to do? Right? How are you going to manage this territory? How are you going to grow this? How are you going to make it, grow the revenue and grow the bottom line as well? And so we had frameworks we operated within, but when you start thinking like an owner from the beginning, you really start thinking about the trade-off of your investments you're making in an opportunity versus your probability of winning it. And so it was really drilled into me very early on is, look, if you're going to take on an opportunity, if you're going to invest the time in it, there has to be a reason why you think you're going to win. And as a seller, you have that choice, right? Your win rate really reflects the choices you make as a seller. And so, yeah, I really focused on showing up as a seller that was really curious about the buyer. And I wanted to ask them questions, make sure I really, two things. One is I really understood what was most important to them, what was really driving their desire to make a change in their business. And also to help them think a little bit differently about perhaps what they were trying to do. And found early on in my career that if I was showed up that way, that CEOs would give me almost all the time in the world I wanted. And because I was showing up there to help them make a decision. And so they gave me the answers to the questions. I earned the right to ask questions. They gave me the answers to the questions I asked. And so I found I was always sort of operating on sort of at max, sort of a 2x pipeline, because I was going to, if I was working on an opportunity, I was going to take it to a close. I was going to win it. And so from first year, but certainly by the second year of my career, so sort of the first full year, and I was making President's Club and so on. I was operating sort of like a 62 to 65% win rate. And that was the expectation that was really sort of laid on me by the sales manager, which was, hey, you need to win more often than you lose. And so we're going to spend the time to help you learn what it's going to take in terms of qualifying people, companies to come into your pipeline. Right. And I wrote about this in my first book, Zero Time Selling. I said, as a seller, you have to envision that, and this is one of the first choices you make. I talked about before, is that your job is really sort of like a bouncer at a club. You're at the head of the velvet rope. You choose who gets into your club. You choose who you sell to. And that's certainly not, sort of the mindset that's been in certainly in software sales in the last 10, 15 years is like, no, you've got all these leads coming in, go sell them. And, they're a sales qualified, quote unquote, sales qualified opportunity. Yeah, they're not. Win rates show they're not really qualified. And so qualification really, again, it's a choice you make as a seller. How deeply do you want to qualify? And are you willing to qualify out those opportunities that you realistically don't have a chance of winning?
So do you feel like some of the technology that has been developed over the last decade or so that has allowed salespeople to scale to a much higher degree has actually been a disservice because maybe they're less strategic?
Yeah, I sometimes get into trouble when I say that, but yeah, I think it's encouraged sellers to be less discriminating,
Mm,
right? Because there's a more opportunity, quote unquote, more opportunity, but success is a choice. Success in life and success in sales is a choice you make, and you have to make choices. Is this something that's worth the investment of my time and my effort? And just because they're willing to talk with you doesn't mean that they're a qualified opportunity.
mm.
So when I break down a company's past results and we look at what's been driving certain win rates, you start right at the beginning, that qualification. What are the criteria you use to accept somebody into your pipeline, into an opportunity, an active opportunity that you're working? And it's there's not enough rigor applied in general. And it seems risky to a seller. It seems risky to sales managers, right? To operate on these thinner pipelines.
Mhm.
But when you learn how to sell and win a higher fraction of opportunities, that's a sustainable strategy. Assuming that's always going to be sort of infinite pipeline that you can tap into, that's we're finding today for many companies. That's not a sustainable strategy.
So, for a sales leader or a salesperson who might be listening right now and being introduced to this idea that your win rate as a number is arguably the most important number you should be paying attention to right now. Um, Tell me, like you've alluded a little bit about, where it starts, but just I want you to give me an idea as to the breadth of this topic.
Sure,
Like you're dedicating an entire show to it. You're probably going to do hundreds of episodes covering win rate, which
knock on
seems
wood.
like a percentage of wins compared over the percentage of total deals. Like that's win rate. So can you paint a picture as to how broad this topic is and the different ways to look at it and why it's so important to kind of
Sure.
contextualize that for me?
Well, the most important perspective that we're going to spend a lot of time looking at is from the perspective of the buyer. So, more than anything else, to me, the important, this is what was drilled into me, is the value of your win rate is that is the buyer's vote about the value of the experience they had with you during their buying process. So, it's, you just, yeah, there's no other way to sort of express it. That is the ultimate view of the buyer is did you do a good job in helping them make a decision? And we've seen more and more research data come out in the last several years that validate that approach that look more of and I wrote about this 12 years ago in my first book is that it's not about what you sell, it's about how you sell. And this has become even more and more important as we see in more crowded markets. The data shows that, and Gartner, let's say, is a perfect example. Gartner put out a report at this point, depending when this goes out, in the last couple of months, and they had this chart in that report that said, here are the 9 most important factors, ranked most important factors that the buyers use to select a vendor that influence their choice of vendor. And on the 9, and I was speaking to a group of sellers soon after that came out, and I put it up on the screen. I said, take a look at this. What's missing? And people looking after about 10, 15 seconds, suddenly people start popping up. It's like, oh my God, product's not on there. Price isn't on there. Yeah, product and price are not on the list of the 9 most important factors the the buyers are considering in choosing a vendor.
Mm,
It's because there's so many companies, they just sort of assume buyers that a competitive product at a competitive price is table stakes, right? So they're all sort of in the mind of the buyer, they're all largely the same. Well, if that's the case, how do you differentiate yourself? Well, what the data says is number one, most important factor influencing selection of a vendor, trustworthiness, right? Were you able to make this emotional connection with one or more buyers, stakeholders in your buying entity to build the level of trust you needed to be able to be given permission to ask the questions that dig a little bit deeper and to get the answers? Yeah, did you earn the right to ask those questions, get the answers? Driven by trust, nothing to do with product and price. The single most important. Number two factor in Gartner's list was that they found in their research was, were you flexible in the way you sold to adapt the way you sell to the way the buyer wants to buy? Nothing to do with product and price. So these are the things, and there's other research that substantiates that. Company out of Australia did some research. So it's listed, they found over the conducting thousands of in-person interviews with on win-loss analysis, the 18 or the 9 reasons why people buy, 9 reasons why you lose deals. Again, nothing to do with product or price. So that experience they had with you as the individual seller. So buying experience is going to be, getting back to your original question, a huge focus of what we talk about is how do you show up as a seller? How do you help the buyer navigate through their process? And and we're going to challenge a lot of these sort of built-in assumptions about what a sales process should be. Sort of these linear stage-based selling processes we're so wedded to, which really don't align at all with the way the buyer goes through their decision-making process.
Fantastic. So this is a show that is for people who are serious about becoming really, really, really good at selling.
Yes, and sales
Yeah.
managers. So individual contributors, sales leaders, because we're going to start changing the mindset that people
Right.
have about how we're approaching this task. And so one, we talk about focus on buying experience. Another big area of focus is on if, and it sort of follows from the first one. So if the buyer's decisions are largely driven by their experience they had with you as a seller, it has a couple of things that come out of that. One is most sellers think their job is to sell the product, right? I'm selling you my product. The buyers are choosing a vendor. Two different mindsets altogether, right? I'm trying to pitch you my product, sell you my product. Yet the buyer says, I'm trying to choose a company to work with. And this came out very clearly in both the Gartner data and the data from this company in Australia. Is that's again not about the product. It's about the company. It's about the seller, the experience you have with them. So we want to get that mindset change. We want people to say, okay, if it's about choosing a vendor, then these things like trust, connection, or curiosity, make sure we really understand what the buyer is trying to achieve, what's really most important to them, really become paramount. So that's a shift from the way we're currently sort of enabling sellers.
And
Um,
and
Go ahead.
how do you recommend people, you've got these sales leaders, you've got these sellers who I guarantee you everybody listening would love to see their numbers in the 60 to 75% win
Sure.
rate. And I'm sure many people will maybe even will after listening to us talk right here, log into their Salesforce and go, "What is my win rate?" and look at it. You see the number on the screen, and I think oftentimes it could be really defeating and be like, "Oh, we're at 20%. What do we do? How do we know what in our sales process needs to change? How do we know, you know, what tweaks we need to make to our approach or what our buyers really value here?" So I guess what I want to ask you is like, if you were to put yourself in the position of a sales leader right now and give them kind of a first step to start diagnosing
Hmm.
what are the most impactful problems that they need
Hmm.
to address to start moving that needle, what would you do in their shoes?
Yeah, and I want to be clear when I answer this. This is not a prompted question from you. Is you have to talk to your buyers, right? I mean, use a system like Closed, but in the past we didn't have those. You just had to go out and talk to your buyers. They'll tell you what you need to do to get better at selling. I found that, and I've said this many times in the past. People say, "Oh, so what are the biggest influences on me in my career in terms of learning how to sell?" Number one has always been my customers.
Mm.
It's not been my training, hasn't been coaching, though I've had some great coaching, so it's maybe close, but it's the buyers. Talk to your customers. They'll tell you what you need to do. And this is something I'm writing about in my new book I'm working on, that'll come out next year, is you have to have this perspective that basically your buyers are hiring you to help them make a decision. So this sort of falls in this whole jobs to be done theory, right?
Yeah.
Is they're hiring you to help them make progress toward a goal. And so if you're hiring somebody to do a job, what are the requirements? What do you need them to be in order to help them get that done? Well, you're not going to know unless you ask, right? It's sure we can train people, but I've talked to sales leaders and they say, "Oh, we're going to, it's a rough patch and we need to, train our people more." I said, "Great. So what are you going to train them on?" "Oh, we've got our skills-based training." Da, da, da. I said, "Okay, great. But have you talked to your buyers about what they need your sellers to be?" No. And it's the same thing when you're hiring salespeople, right? You bring them into an environment. It's like, okay, before you put that job description together, have you talked to your buyers about what they need your sellers to be to help them get their job done? And the answer is always no. No one's ever done that. But it's the most logical thing, right? Ask the buyers. They'll tell you. Talk to your customers. The solution to a sales problem is never, this is a wise old boss I had at one point. He said, look, the solution to a sales problem is never found in the office. Right? So it's never, "Oh, let's just do more training." It's like, "No, but let's sure, training maybe, but let's decide what we need to train based on what our customers are telling us they need us to be." And this is the big gap. So that's another area we're really gonna focus on. Is again, it's part of the buying experience. But are you really listening to your customers? Are you asking them? Yeah, with many customers, clients of mine in the past as a consultant, we'd do regulars before platforms like Close were available, but we'd do regular customer surveys. And we sort of set up, customer satisfaction rating for sales from our buyers. And we tried to keep it at 90% or above. Think about that. Customers and we were successful in doing so, but it required we change how we showed up. We showed up as curious instead of pitching, right? We showed up as, look, we want to understand you more than we want you to sort of understand what we're doing. Let's start there. And how you show up makes a difference. First impressions make a difference because the buyers, much as you're making a choice who you're selling to, the buyers are similarly making a decision. They have a limited amount of time and attention that they can invest in a salesperson. They're going to choose. And yeah, I talk to sellers all the time that say, "Oh, reached out. I thought we had a good conversation, then we got ghosted." I was like, "No, you didn't get ghosted. What happened is the customer made a decision about you and they decided you just weren't worth their time and attention."
Mm, that hurts.
Yeah. Well, the thing about selling is ultimately it is personal, right? We're seeing this data that says, look, the way the buyers are making their vendor selections based on their experience with sellers, that is personal. But to me, that is incredibly exciting to hear because that means, look, I can't control my product, the features it has, the functionality. I can't control the pricing. I can control me, right? And that's the way I'm being judged is me. Right? The decisions are being driven by me and how they're perceiving me and how they're experiencing me, as well as the team, right? But yeah, I'm the point person. Wow, that's empowering as a seller, right? You can complain, "Oh, we don't have this feature, we don't have that function." It's not what's driving the decision. And if the customer's got to the point where you're thinking you're getting that objection, then yeah, you need to really dig down deeper because that's generally not it.
The more I listen to you talk, the more I realize how deep the rabbit hole goes. That that literally everything you do as a sales leader or a seller impacts your win rate. It's
Yeah.
either going to help you win more deals or it's going to prevent you from winning more deals. It's going to get in your way. And
And
so really this is an examination of one, how to be a really good salesperson, like how to understand what impacts the outcome of a deal and what has the highest impact. And then number two, like how do you measure that?
Mhm.
And then number three, how do you pass that information along and teach it so that every seller who is as concerned about their win rate as you were can embody the talents and the gifts and the I don't know, the day-to-day activities that need to be embodied and embraced in order to be really good at what you do. And it's not just activities, it's like mindsets.
It
It's
it is your perspective on things, and it's
how you show up.
how you show up and the choices you make, right?
Yeah.
Do this, not that. And but you have to operate this level of intention about everything.
Mm.
And so I wrote about this in Sell Without Selling Out. My latest book is because that was book was all about how do we create these positive buying experiences. And it boils down to the choices you make. And so every time you interact with a buyer, this is really important for sellers to keep in mind is every time you make the decision to interact with the buyer, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you're consuming some of their time and attention, which is very limited resource. They're going to want a return on that investment of their time and attention. And that what that return is that as a result of interacting with you, they are some distance closer to making their decision after that interaction than they were before. Right. So if you're going to say, look, let's have a call. Okay. Well, what does the buyer need from you right now to help them make progress toward making a decision? And if you don't know the answer to that and you don't know how you're going to get that accomplished in the call,
You
don't
shouldn't be having the call.
call. Right.
Yeah.
It's a choice you make. And so you have this choice to be prepared to sell or not to sell. And so if you consume some of the customer's limited time and attention and don't help them make progress toward making a decision, you're only gonna be able to do that so many times before they make that call that this person's just not worth our time. Boom, you're ghosted. You're gone. And it's not because they're ignoring you. They made a decision about you. So you just have to operate with this level of intent. And when there is a mindset, is everything makes a difference. There is no small thing or unimportant thing in sales. And because the customer never forgets,
Mm.
right? So everything makes a difference. And to the point you made before is you have to have this view on the world, this operating mindset to say, look, okay, I'm gonna send an email to the buyer. What's the value they're gonna get from this email? What's the purpose of this? Is it gonna be worth their time? If not, maybe there's something I don't understand. I need to go back, ask some more questions, or look at my notes, make sure I really understood this. You just have to operate with this level of intentionality every step of the way. And when you do, yeah, the results start flowing differently. We run this cohort based training program. We just changed the name, but it's now called Buyer Experience Boot Camp. And first session in September with the new name. But it's all about increasing win rates, but it's about how you show up differently and create this differentiated buyer experience. And we've had sellers that have been, 10, 20 years in sales that it's been eye opening for them because they had been pretty successful, but suddenly they found that by showing up differently, showing up with this level of intent to help and serve the buyer, that they get a different reception.
Mm.
And it was tangible to them. Wow, suddenly people are more open than they were in the past. Suddenly we're getting, more access into stakeholders. Suddenly we're being shared information that they wouldn't normally have shared with us because you connected, you built that level of trust and credibility. You showed that you were there first and foremost for them. You're transparent in your motivations. Makes a huge difference.
Huge. I'm sure it makes an enormous difference, especially in a day where I don't know about your inbox, but my inbox is full
Mm.
of uh, attempts to grab my attention
Mhm.
that are impersonal, that are not very thoughtful, that don't seem at all concerned with actually concerned with my problems, my struggles, my day to day life,
Yep.
and more concerned about what I can do for them
Mhm.
and what how I can spend my money on them. From that side of the experience, it's really interesting to see the difference between a seller who genuinely does care and genuinely pays attention and genuinely connects and somebody who doesn't. So I
Well, the change is going to come from both. Has to come from both directions. Has to come
yeah,
from above, but as individual sellers, you have ultimate control over this. And yeah, my last book called Sell Without Selling Out. The subtitle was A Guide to Success on Your Own Terms. And this is really important for sellers to keep in mind is, if you want to build a sustainable, successful career in sales, is you have to become the best version of you that you possibly can. And you're not going to be the same as anybody else. You necessarily will do things a certain way that align with your strengths and your character and your values and things that are important to you. And you need to put yourself in a situation where you're able to, develop yourself accordingly. And too often in sales, you'll come into situations where, there's real emphasis on, hey, comply with our process, comply with our playbook. And it's fine. We all operate within boundaries. But within those boundaries, within those frameworks, you have to find out what works best for you and really lean into it. And I've had several instances in my career, earlier in my career, where I had tough conversations with bosses that is like they were sort of torn because I was crushing it, but I wasn't really completely aligned with what they wanted. And it's like, hey, if I'd stopped delivering, then judge me on that. But I'm delivering results. And yes, I'm not doing exactly the way you want. I'm not doing exactly the way everybody else is doing it, but it's not disruptive and it's working extremely well and it's great for the company. Find those situations, right? As a seller, because you have a colleague, former client, Brandon Fluharty, who's developed big voice in the sales world about becoming a seven-figure seller. And I coached Brandon at some point in his earlier in his career. Um, Not to take credit for it. He's amazing. But yeah, he talks about the ideas that you have to be really prepared and you sort of have your own way of doing things. Is that success is really based on putting yourself in the right situation. And so if you find yourself struggling and you find that you have these thoughts in your mind as a seller, it's like, no, I think there's a better way to do this, right? My intuition and it's telling me, and maybe my experience as well is telling me there's a better way I should be doing this, but you feel like you can't do it in your current situation. Go find the new situation. Go find the boss that will enable you to do that, who will support you in becoming the best version of yourself. There's lots of great bosses out there. Is go find the one that will support you to become you, the best version of you, because that's what your buyers want. And if you do that, then the results will follow, the income will follow, the fulfillment will follow. And yeah, you'll have a great career in sales.
Well, I'm excited to follow along this journey with you. Sounds like it's going to be an incredible show, and it sounds like it's going to attract a certain caliber of sales obsessed person. And I'm really excited to see that audience develop, continue to develop, and watch people walk away with a newfound perspective on how to really drive results. And it's by really thinking about that number, win rate, like how can I win more of the deals that land on my table?
Yeah. And so a couple things. I mean, one is I really want to thank Closed for their support of the show. Yeah, really appreciate the partnership and because we're aligned in so many ways in terms of our perspective about the importance of win rate and the importance of the buyer experience, understanding what the buyers believe. So critical. One thing I hear sometimes from sellers is, well, all this emphasis on winning doesn't really seem like it's customer focused, right? It's like, well, there's a couple things I want people to think about with it. One is think about why you're in sales, right? Why do you, some people, not to say why you're in sales, but why do you stay in sales? And again, the research is pretty clear on this as well, which is people stay in sales because they find fulfillment in helping companies, their customers, make change, improve in certain ways. It's if you're purely in it for the money, that's not a long-term motivation, right? Because what I've always found is by doing well, I or by doing good, I do well, right?
Right.
Um, but if you're in sales to help your customers, you can't help them if you can't learn how to win their business. It's that simple,
Yeah.
right? I'm here and I get fulfillment from it, but I'm not going to be fulfilled if I can't ever win business. So winning is not antithetical to helping the buyers. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's how you help your buyers is by winning their business. And it's just an important mindset to sort of keep is that, yeah, I do well if you do well. Zig Ziglar talked about this. The great Zig Ziglar said, sort of paraphrasing, said, if you help enough other people get what they want out of life, you'll get what you want out of life. And that's our job as sellers, right? We win if they win. So yeah, help your customers win. And you only do that by being buyer centric, not sales centric.
So if somebody listening wants to know how to help their customers win more and they want to check out your show, where do you want them to go?
Well, we're on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. So all the major platforms the show will be on. If you don't have access to any of those, then you can come to my website, andypaul.com, and you can listen to the episode there. And then while you're there, yeah, check out the other things we do to help companies with win rate. And yeah, reach out to me if you have any questions.
Fantastic. Andy, thanks so much for your time today. Once again, super excited to follow along with your new show and see the impact that it has on sellers all over the world. You're awesome.
Thank you, Nate.
Yeah, you're prolific. I'm really excited. Thanks again for tuning into today's episode. One last shameless plug before you go. Check out Andy Paul's new podcast. You can just search for it on the podcast app of your choosing. It's called the Win Rate Podcast, and the first couple episodes have been amazing. And if you listen to that show and you start to think, man, it would be really great to get a better understanding of some of the things we could do to improve our win rates, a great place to start is by going to freebuyerinterview.com. And the folks over here at Closed will gladly go out and interview one, maybe a couple of your buyers from recent deals to figure out why exactly you won or lost that deal. And that information can be used to help train sales reps or make adjustments to your pricing and packaging or to adjust the priorities of your product roadmap, among many other things to help you win more deals. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, once again, that URL is freebuyerinterview.com.